My son told me I wasn't his father anymore. He said it the same day he found out about my second wedding. I was standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to him talk in this calm, flat voice. No yelling, no tears, and that calmness scared me way more than any shouting match could have. Because anger fades, but when someone talks that steady, it means they'd already made up their mind long before they picked up the phone. Before the divorce, his mom and I were together almost 20 years. From the outside, it probably looked like everything was fine between us, because we never fought in front of him, never raised our voices when he was around. That's exactly why, when I told him I was moving out, it hit him like it came out of nowhere. Even though the truth is, it had been falling apart for years, quietly, so quietly, that even I didn't want to admit it to myself for a long time. The truth is, his mom and I had just stopped being those people we were for each other at the start. That happens to a lot of couples, and it doesn't mean anyone's a bad person or a cheater. At some point, two people wake up next to each other and realize they've been living like roommates for a while now, not like husband and wife. When I finally got up the nerve to say it out loud, when I told her I wanted to leave, somehow, all the blame ended up landing on me. And I let it, because I didn't want my son thinking badly of his mother. He was a teenager back then, that age where any change in the family doesn't just feel hard, it feels like a betrayal aimed straight at him. And his mom, whether she meant to or not, never explained to him that leaving had been a mutual decision. She let him believe I was the one who walked, that I was the one who wrecked everything. And honestly, I didn't push back on that at the time, because I figured it'd be easier for him to be mad at one person than to feel torn between two parents he loved equally. The first few months after I moved out, I called him every day. He'd answer, short, reluctant, but he'd answer. We even hung out sometimes, grabbed pizza together, and even though there was this new, strange distance between us, I believed it would fade with time. I thought it was just a phase every kid of divorced parents has to go through. Then I met the woman who'd later become my wife, and right from that point on, everything started changing a lot faster than I expected. At first, my son just started picking up the phone less. Then he switched to short, dry text messages instead of calling. And when I first asked him to meet her, he answered with one sentence that he had zero interest in meeting the woman his mom cried over at night. At the time, I had no idea how deep that line had cut into him. Because to him, this wasn't just my personal life, it was proof that I hadn't just left, I'd left for someone specific. In his teenage mind, those two events, the divorce and the new relationship, blurred into one straight line of cause and effect, even though in reality, almost 1.5 years of loneliness had passed in between, which he knew nothing about. I tried explaining it to him, tried telling him I'd met her only after his mom and I had already fully split up, that plenty of time had passed between me leaving the house and us meeting. But he didn't want to hear the details. Timeline didn't matter to him. Only one feeling mattered. The feeling that his dad had traded his mom for another woman. Whatever I said, that feeling only got stronger. When I announced the wedding, I drove out to see him in person, sat across from him at the kitchen table in the house he shared with his mom, and tried to explain everything calmly, without getting emotional. I told him I wanted him there, that whatever he thought of my new wife, I wanted him by my side that day. He stayed quiet for a long time, staring out the window, and then he said the one line I still hear whenever I close my eyes. He said that as far as he was concerned, I died the day I decided a new family mattered more than the old one. I didn't even get a chance to respond because he got up and walked out of the kitchen. And my ex-wife, standing in the doorway, who'd heard the whole conversation, didn't say a single word in my defense. That's when it really hit me that I hadn't just lost my son's support, I'd lost any chance of someone in that house ever telling him the truth about how things actually went down. The wedding happened without him. My new wife, whose name was Rachel, knew all of this. She knew every detail of the story, knew that to my son she'd forever be the reason for his pain, even though in reality she had nothing to do with any of it. Instead of getting offended or asking me to choose, every single time I brought up my son, she'd say the same thing, that someday the truth would find its own way to reach him. Back then, I figured that was just something people say to make you feel better. I had no idea how prophetic it would turn out to be, or that she, not me, would end up being the one to bring my son back. Though as the months passed, and then years of complete silence, I started losing hope that it was even possible. The truth didn't reach him through words. It reached him through something none of us saw coming. It happened almost a year after the wedding, when an unknown number called me one evening. A woman's voice told me my ex-wife had been in a car accident, that they'd just brought her into the hospital, and that her condition was serious. For the first second, I didn't know what to do, because we hadn't been the kind of people who rush to each other in a crisis for a long time. But I went anyway, because somewhere deep down I still felt responsible for her, if only for our son's sake. When I got to the hospital, I saw him standing there in the hallway, white as a sheet. He didn't even notice me right away. That's how locked in he was on the doors to the operating room. Rachel came with me, even though I never asked her to. She just got in the car next to me and told me I wasn't going through this alone. When we walked onto the floor, I watched my son look at her. There was a mix of surprise and old resentment in his eyes, like he wanted to ask what she was even doing there. The doctor said they needed to operate and that they needed a rare blood type they didn't have enough of at the moment. That usual chaos started, everyone calling relatives, asking who has what blood type. Turned out neither I nor my son had the right one. Rachel, the second she heard which type they needed, walked straight up to the nurse without a word and said she had exactly that blood type and that she was ready to donate right then. My son stood there and heard all of it, and I watched something in his face start to crack. Because the woman he'd blamed for all his pain didn't say one word about the past in that moment, didn't remind anyone that this technically wasn't her problem. She just went and donated blood for a woman she'd never even met, for the mother of a kid who'd hated her for years, without asking if she even deserved a thank you. The surgery took several hours, and the whole time the three of us sat in the hallway, almost completely silent. I remember at one point my son quietly asked me why she'd done it. I told him honestly that I didn't know for sure, but I thought she was just the kind of person who can't stand on the sidelines when someone's hurting, even if that someone would never thank her for it. The surgery went well. The doctor said one more hour of delay could have cost her life. When they finally moved his mom to a room, and it was clear the danger had passed, my son walked out into the hallway by himself, without a word. Rachel followed him, because she could see he was struggling. And even though I didn't hear their whole conversation, he told me later that she'd only said one thing to him. She told him she never wanted to take his father away from him, that all she'd wanted was to have someone to love too, and that she understood why he'd hated her all those years, and that she wasn't holding it against him. That night, there was no reconciliation between us yet. Everything played out a lot quieter and slower than it does in the movies. The first few weeks after the surgery went by like nothing much had happened. My son came to the hospital every day. Rachel and I came too. We'd cross paths in the hallway or the hospital cafeteria sometimes. He was still guarded with me, but I noticed he stopped looking away when he saw Rachel, and sometimes even gave her a quick thanks when she brought coffee for everyone. His mom recovered slowly, and it was during those weeks that something more important than any conversation was happening. Because my son watched Rachel ask the doctors every single day about the condition of a woman she had zero obligation to care about. Watched her bring him food from home when worry made him forget to eat. Watched her never once complain, never once hint that this wasn't her family, wasn't her problem. Little by little, that everyday, unremarkable care started to mean a lot more to him than any of my old explanations ever did. He still wasn't saying anything out loud at that point, but he started texting me every once in a while. Short updates on his mom's health at first, then little things from his own life, a photo of something he'd cooked, a complaint about a rough day at work. Every one of those messages felt like a small step back toward me. Almost another 6 months went by before he suggested, on his own, with no nudge from me, that the three of us meet up, me and Rachel, at some regular coffee shop near his job. By then, he wasn't that teenager anymore, the one who'd once told me I was dead to him. He'd grown up, landed his first real job, and I think it was adult life itself, with all its own struggles, that let him look at our story differently. Not through the eyes of a hurt kid anymore, but through the eyes of someone who was starting to understand on his own that relationships between adults are rarely as simple as they look from the outside. We sat at a table by the window, and the conversation started off rough, careful. Nobody wanted to touch the painful stuff. Until he looked over at Rachel himself and said he wanted to apologize for all those years of silence, for everything he'd said about her without really knowing her. Rachel, instead of accepting the apology with any kind of superiority, just reached her hand across the table, took his, and told him no apology was necessary, that she was just glad she finally got to find out what kind of person the son of the man she loved actually was. That's when he smiled at me for the first time in years, the same way he used to smile as a kid. And he started telling me how hard it had been carrying that anger around all that time, how it even surprised him sometimes that he couldn't let it go, even though his head had already worked everything out. I listened to him and thought, that's probably just how it goes for kids of divorced parents. They hold on to the pain not because they want revenge, but because for a while, that pain is the only proof their old family ever existed at all. Rachel told him a little about herself then, told him she'd been through her own parents' divorce as a kid, and that she knew what it felt like when it seems like the whole world splits into two sides. That's exactly why she never tried to take his mom's place in his life. She just wanted to be there if he ever needed her. Listening to her, I watched the tension drain out of my son's shoulders, like he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying way too long. He said he wanted to come by sometime on a weekend, just to hang out, maybe even help me with something in the garage, like we used to do together when he was a kid. When we walked out of that coffee shop, he suddenly hugged me goodbye, tight, real, the way he hadn't in years, and said one word. He said, "Dad." In that second, I realized those 3 years of silence hadn't ended because of my excuses or my explanations. They'd ended because of one woman who never once tried to prove she was right with words, and instead, every time the chance came up, just showed it through what she did.